My question is, Mr. President, what are you so afraid of?
I'm Lucas Kuntz, and I'm running for U.S. Senate here in Missouri. You know what? Forget it. I don't have to do this type of thing. You know, I kind of got my fill of carrying one of these around in Iraq and Afghanistan. Stunts like that, those are for those clowns on the other side, like that mansion man Mark McCloskey. If you don't remember who I'm talking about, he's that guy who got his 15 minutes of fame waving one of these weapons of war around at a bunch of people who were walking by his mansion. And now he somehow thinks that that qualifies himself to be a U.S. Senator. Well, Mark, I hear you got a trial coming up pretty soon here for your misuse of a weapon. So I've got a challenge for you. How about this? If you do something that you should have done already a long time ago, and that's apologize to all those people you threatened with deadly force, I'll give you one U.S. Marine-led weapons training class. That way, you can keep yourself out of future trouble with the law, and everyone around you will be a whole lot safer. I'm ready whenever you are. And for anyone else who's watching this video, if you think that Mansion Man Mark should take up this challenge and make the world a safer place, go to mansionmanmark.com and sign up.
What you saw happen to us could just as easily happen to any of you who are watching from quiet neighborhoods around our country. And that's what we want to speak to you about tonight.
That's exactly right. Whether it's the defunding of police, ending cash bail so criminals can be released back out on the streets the same day to riot again, or encouraging anarchy and chaos on our streets, it seems as if the Democrats no longer view the government's job as protecting honest citizens from criminals, but rather protecting criminals from honest citizens.
Make sure that I stay at home for our pregnancy test, just in case it's negative, because I don't want to be forced to grieve in a way that 102 members of this chamber decided. In 2008, My husband was serving in the Wardak province in Afghanistan with the 101st Airborne. He completed 300 combat missions, and his unit was fired upon every single day. During one of those missions, he was shot multiple times, including a gunshot to the lower abdomen. The bullet ricocheted off of the magazine on his pistol belt and ended up causing him great harm to his reproductive organs. But he kept serving his country, unaware of the implications he would face later in his life. We got married in 2017, and in 2019, we started trying to conceive our first child. After almost a year of no success, we went in for testing, and we learned that my husband was infertile due to the wounds he received in combat. Our only chance of having a baby would be if we completed in vitro fertilization, or IVF, as hundreds and thousands of women have to do in our country and in our state. On February 14th, 2020, we started our journey with me getting daily injections every day. After 24 injections over 12 days, 9 visits to the doctor for blood work and ultrasounds, and 2 procedures, we were blessed to have not 1, but 2 fertilized embryos. On February 28th, 2020, we had both of those embryos transferred into my womb. I was so excited and hopeful at the idea of finally becoming a mother, something I've dreamed about since I was a little girl, like so many other women have dreamed about since they were little girls. On March 13th, 2020, 10 minutes before the governor announced he was shutting down the state due to COVID-19, we received a devastating phone call that my pregnancy test came back negative. I was completely and utterly devastated. Under this proposed legislation, had I learned that my pregnancy failed in the health facility, the facility would be mandated to force me to relive my loss by discussing the need for us to hold a ritual burial or cremation. At a time when I already felt like a failure as a woman and as a wife, I would be forced to relive that trauma, not in a way that I decided, but in a way that 102 members of this chamber decided was appropriate. Now let's fast forward to now. Next week, on June 18th, after a year of failed fertility treatments, I'm beginning another round of IVF. I will go through dozens of painful injections, doctor's visits, driving back and forth from Harrisburg in order to do my job, hormonal changes and stress. But all of it will be worth it if we're successful. But now, if this legislation passes, my experience will be clouded in fear. If we transfer embryos, I will make sure that I stay at home for our pregnancy test, just in case it's negative, because I don't want to be forced to grieve in a way that 102 members of this chamber decided. There is also a chance this time around that we could be successful and that we will have embryos left in a lab. We will be forced to pay large sums of money to keep those embryos, even if they may never be used, or to have a ritual burial or cremation, because this legislation fails to address the difference between a fertilized egg and a viable fetus. This legislation is about taking away a family's choice to grieve and mourn in a way that works for them. This legislation will strip me and my husband from the choice to grieve in a way that we see fit. It will force us to relive Brad's trauma as a combat veteran and the impact that experience has had on our lives over and over again.
An agenda pursued by a party that is 100% white in a chamber that is 70% male. Oh, your boos mean nothing.
Speaker, that's enough.
It is not lost on me, and I'm sure it's not lost on many of the members here today, that this legislation is just one more unnecessary overreach in a grossly, predictably misogynistic agenda. An agenda pursued by a party that is 100% white in a chamber that is 70% male. Oh, your boos mean nothing.
Speaker, that's enough.
Your boos mean nothing to me. I've seen who you cheer for.
The gentleman will suspend.
Mr. Speaker,
For what purpose does the majority leader rise?
I believe these comments are inflammatory to our members and to this esteemed chamber. We have tried to give latitude on this issue, both yesterday and today, but I will not have our members impugned or insulted or this kind of behavior on this floor.
Are you not 100% white?
Gentleman is out of order.
100% white,
gentleman,
70% male.
Mr. Speaker,
turn off his mic.
I rise today, obviously, in vehement opposition to House Bill 118. Politicians, legislatures, this particular legislature, a room full of a majority of men, should not be seeking to impose such personal and traumatizing and cruel religious mandates on women and their families in Pennsylvania. Not now and not ever. This legislation flies in the face of the constitutional separation between church and state. This bill not only insensitively targets women and those experiencing miscarriages, ectopic pregnancies, and abortion at a time of extreme vulnerability, it does so by spreading medical misinformation and violating patients' privacy rights. But I want to call attention to something else, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the fact that my colleagues, my Democratic women colleagues, have had to stand up in the House of Representatives, their place of employment, and retell these extremely personal stories of trauma in order to get our colleagues to consider doing the right thing is simply unacceptable. The cost of being a woman legislator in Pennsylvania. The fact that women from my caucus have had to stand up here and share the stories that they could barely share with their own families. Stories of infertility, loss of pregnancy, and termination, in order to stop the advancement of a bill that will hurt countless more women and families, is just wrong. At a time when we should be coming together and discussing how to pull Pennsylvania out of the grips of COVID-19 and invest in our future and invest in women who we know bore a disproportionate amount of the impact of COVID-19. And instead, we're here focusing on a distraction, debating a bill that will never become law. But this feels normal for far too many of us. This is just another act in a political theater that has plagued this chamber for far too long. We are a legislature that has met more to remove mask mandates, strip executive emergency powers, and overturn free and fair elections than we have to make strategic investments in Pennsylvania's women, children, and families.
My question is, Mr. President, what are you so afraid of? The list of your political opponents who are dead, imprisoned, or jailed is long. Alexei Navalny's organization calls for free and fair elections, an end to corruption. But Russia has outlawed that organization, calling it extremist. And you have now prevented anyone who supports him to run for office. So my question is, Mr. President, what are you so afraid of?
America just recently had very severe events after well-known events after a killing of an African American. and an entire movement developed known as Black Lives Matter. I'm not going to comment on that, but here's what I do want to say. What we saw was disorder, destruction, violations of the law, etc. We feel sympathy for the United States of America, but we don't want that to happen on our territory. And we're doing our utmost in order to not allow it to happen. And some fears, it has nothing to do with anything. Please.
You didn't answer my question, sir. If all of your political opponents are dead, in prison, poisoned, doesn't that send a message that you do not want a fair political fight?
As for who is killing whom or throwing whom in jail, people came to the U.S. Congress with political demands. 400 people. Over 400 people had criminal charges placed on them. They faced prison sentences of up to 20, maybe even 25 years. They're being called domestic terrorists. They're being accused of a number of other crimes. 70 of them were arrested right away after the events, and 30 of them are still under arrest. It's unclear on what grounds. And as for nobody from the official authorities has informed us about it. Some people died, and one of the people that died, they were simply shot on the spot by the police, although they were not threatening the police with any weapons. In many countries, the same thing happens that happens in our country. I'd like to stress once more that we sympathize with what happened in the United States, but we have no desire to allow the same thing to happen in our country.